The Dershow.
What does the presumption of innocence mean? It could mean two things. It could mean we, the public and judges, must presume that anybody arrested is innocent until he's proved guilty. That's just not realistic in light of what we know in America, unlike in China and in Iran and other places, Russia. The vast majority of people who are brought to trial for serious crimes are in fact guilty. I know most of my clients who have been brought to trial and convicted have been guilty. Some have been innocent. Sometimes I don't know the difference, but most have been guilty, and thank God for that. You wouldn't want to live in a system where the majority of people brought to trial are innocent. So how should the court deal with a situation where, look, this guy looks guilty. Look at the evidence. My God, look at that videotape of him kicking and beating up his former girlfriend. Oh, we don't like him. He's probably guilty. He'd probably be found guilty. But there hasn't been a trial yet. And there can't be a trial. Certainly for many months, you can't bring a person to trial right away. He has the right to prepare a defense. So what do we do with him in the meantime? It's easy if he's going to flee. There's no evidence that that P. Diddy would flee. If he was going to flee, he would have fled earlier. He knew he was going to get indicted. It was no secret. He traveled to New York to get indicted and to get arrested and to get, taken in front of the judge. So if he wanted to run away, he has private planes, he has a fortune of money. He could have, in the months prior to that, when he wasn't being observed so closely, he could have probably flown his private plane to some country that doesn't have an extradition treaty, or a country that doesn't have an extradition treaty that covers sex offenses. France, for example, don't know whether these crimes would be covered exactly, but France in general, Roman Polanski has been extradited by the United States, and France won't send him, although he was charged with having underage sex with a 14-year-old who allegedly he drugged, and yet France allows him to live the life of Riley. He just luxurious. I know when my son and I went to Paris for the opening of our movie Reversal of Fortune, which he produced, and it was based on my book. Who came to the opening? Roman Polanski. And he didn't like the way it was portrayed. He didn't think it was done with enough dignity. But we spoke to him, and then I actually represented him briefly. But Bo Diddy didn't go to France, and he didn't go to other places where he would have been welcome with his money. Money buys a lot. So I don't think he's a flight risk. And if he were a flight risk, it's easy. You make him stay in a New York apartment. You make him wear an ankle bracelet. The ankle bracelet has, a 1,000-foot radius. If he goes beyond the radius, he's immediately apprehended and put in jail. Or if you think that's not good enough, you can require him to pay for his own armed guards, and the armed guards have to stand approved by the government, by the Marshal Service, and they have to stand in front of all entrances and exits to the apartment. I've had that happen with clients of mine. In fact, I got a court to reverse the refusal to do that. It was Judge Sotomayor when she was sitting as a circuit court judge before she went on the Supreme Court. She ruled in favor of my client and allowed him to stay out in home arrest with armed guards at his house. Some judges won't do that because they say, well, only some people can afford to have armed guards. But, the equal protection doesn't mean everybody gets reduced to the lowest common denominator. It means you try to bring everybody up to the best. And if people can't afford it, hey, they can't afford Harvard either, and they can't afford the best medical care either. That's what free market society does. But you don't deny a person who has the ability to have armed guards prevent him from fleeing. So I don't think there's any justification whatsoever for keeping P. Diddy in jail, in a house of detention, which is really a hellhole, you have to tell you. It's much worse than prison. Jail is much worse than prison. Prison has outdoors, you can work, you can play basketball. Jail is just, rat-infested cells with horrible, horrible food, and you're with people from the worst kinds of crimes, murderers and rapists and such. So, being in jail pending trial is horrible, and it should never be required unless the person really is very likely to flee or likely to commit crimes. while out on bail. People argue the presumption of innocence has nothing to do with what the courts or what the judges, how they treat somebody, or how we treat somebody who's been arrested. Presumption of innocence only has to do with the jury instruction. The jury is told that just because there's been an indictment, you shouldn't presume that he's guilty. You should presume he's innocent until and unless you've heard sufficient evidence to conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty. That's a narrow interpretation of the presumption of innocence. The vast majority of Americans understand the presumption of innocence in the broader sense that as an American citizen, merely being arrested doesn't change your status. Obviously, in the case of Rao, we now have a confession from him, a written statement saying, I was trying to kill the president, I failed. I'm going to give $150,000 to anybody else who succeeds. He's obviously guilty of something, as I argued yesterday. Probably not attempted murder. We'll get to that in the questions and the letters, because a lot of people disagreed with me. But the issue is whether or not you're entitled to treat him as guilty before he's found guilty by a jury. And I think the answer to that should generally be no. People should not be able to be tried by the media.